I was sitting there, minding my own business, trying to figure out if I'd left my phone on silent or if I'd just missed an email from a supplier, the usual grind. Then Greg Holloway, CEO of Pacific Freight Solutions, drops the bomb. "Jack, we're making some changes," he said, his voice all polished and rehearsed, like he'd practiced this line in front of a mirror. "We're realigning the organization." I'd been with the company since day one, built it from scratch, really, from a tiny office with a desk that was way too big for the space, to a multi-million-dollar operation. But in that moment, none of that mattered. The words weren't, "You're fired," but they might as well have been. I was being pushed out, stripped of authority, sidelined under the excuse of realignment. It hit me hard, sure. I didn't even know how to respond at first. All those people in the room, executives, managers, watching, waiting for me to say something. But there was nothing to say. Greg, the fresh-faced 32-year-old, looked like he had it all figured out with his shiny MBA, while I was just the guy who actually made the damn thing work. I didn't shout, didn't fight it. I didn't even make eye contact with anyone as I stood up to grab my stuff. I just kept my head down, walked past the others in the office, and slipped my business card across Greg's desk without a word. Just a small act. Subtle. It was all I could manage. I'd been cut loose from any real authority. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. Anger, humiliation, confusion. Yeah, they were there, all tangled together in my gut. But I was already thinking about my next move. My mind raced, plotting out how I could use this humiliation to my advantage. That was how I survived in this business, after all, by always staying one step ahead. I walked out of that office. This wasn't the end for me, not by a long shot. I didn't even get a full week to breathe before the cracks started showing. Greg didn't waste a second stepping into the role like he'd earned it. The very next Monday, he called a meeting without me. Vendor strategy. My territory. I stayed silent, sitting at my desk, while the execs filed into the glass-walled conference room. I could see them nodding along while Greg waved his hands around and clicked through his PowerPoint like he'd unlocked some secret to the universe. Problem was, he didn't know jack about how any of it actually worked. The office started to feel different, tighter, quieter. People kept their heads down more. Morale dipped, but nobody said it out loud. Greg strutted around like things were fine, but the rhythm was off, like a truck driving with one tire half flat. I could feel the weight of every missed beat. Then, out of nowhere, I got this email, addressed directly to me, from a guy named Nathan Torres at Helix Logistics. "Hi, Jack. I'm working on behalf of Helix to get clarity on some operational workflows that appear undocumented. Hoping you can provide insight into how freight scheduling and vendor redundancies were managed prior to the current transition." I read it twice. I waited 5 hours before I answered. Didn't want it to look desperate. I kept the tone dry, factual, laid out our cross-routing protocols, our tiered supplier system, and how we balanced regional carriers against national ones during peak disruptions. Nothing flashy, just what worked. Next morning, Nathan replied, "Thanks, Jack. Very helpful. Would appreciate staying in touch as we continue due diligence." No one in the office knew. Not Greg, not his new crew, not even the finance team. But I knew. Helix was already watching. They weren't impressed. Greg could run his little show, flash his new branding decks, play CEO. I'd built the engine. I still knew how to keep it running, with or without the title. The more Greg floundered, the more Helix started paying attention to what I was quietly doing behind the scenes. It wasn't like I was planning anything major or making a grand gesture. I wasn't out to steal anyone's thunder. I just knew how to fix things, and I was good at it. The emails from Nathan kept coming. Little things at first. Follow-up questions about vendor management, risk assessments on certain shipping routes, stuff that Greg had ignored or didn't even know about. I gave him what he needed. No fanfare, no drama. Just facts. Greg, meanwhile, was off making waves with his rebranding campaign. He seemed to think flashy logos and new slogans would somehow fix the supply chain issues, but he couldn't see the cracks. Hell, he didn't even know where to look. Then one day, out of nowhere, I got an email from a woman named Karen at Helix. She was the integration specialist for the merger, and she wanted to talk about operational continuity. She attached a confidential file with the subject line, Leadership Changes. I clicked it open, expecting another round of vendor reports or logistics updates. Instead, I saw my name, Continuity Lead. Underlined. I leaned back in my chair, reading through it again. Continuity Lead. My role was to ensure that operations ran smoothly during the acquisition process. There it was, plain as day. I didn't say a word to anyone. I didn't need to. Greg was still focused on rebranding and restructuring, thinking that was the big win. I had bigger plans. For now, I kept a low profile. Didn't even bring it up to Karen when we exchanged emails. I wasn't trying to make headlines or get attention. I just wanted to keep things running like they used to. Keep the wheels turning without anyone noticing the grease. Then I did something Greg wouldn't have done. I documented everything. Every mistake, every misstep, every warning I'd given, all the things he'd ignored. And I sent it straight to Helix's risk team. Just the facts. No opinion. I knew the drill. That night, when I got home, I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of it. I had done my job. I'd saved the company again, but this time, I knew I wasn't the one who would get the credit. Greg would keep on with his flashy ideas while I stayed behind the curtain, pulling the strings. And in the end, when Helix saw the mess he'd made, they'd know exactly who had been holding it all together. Things were slipping. I could feel it. And more importantly, I could see it. Greg's latest cost-saving move, slashing our vendor redundancies, had disaster written all over it. He cut ties with backup suppliers, figuring he could streamline everything and save a buck. The problem? Those backup suppliers were our cushion. They were the ones who stepped in when the main guys dropped the ball, when weather hit, or when something went sideways in the middle of a shipment. But Greg didn't care. He was too focused on his shiny new vision to see the structure that had kept this company from crumbling during tough times. A few weeks later, a shipment got delayed, then another, then a third, and this time, a major supplier threatened to pull out. Payments were missed, and with no backup in place, we were scrambling to fix the issue. If not for the contingency plan I'd put in place months ago, the one Greg had no clue about, we would have faced a massive disruption. I wasn't going to let the whole thing blow up in front of everyone, though. Instead of confronting Greg directly, I did what I'd done before. I documented the issue, outlined how Greg's decision violated our continuity clauses, and sent the report to Helix. Straightforward, no emotion, just facts. I knew it would get noticed. It didn't take long. A few days later, I got an email from Karen. Hi, Jack. I've reviewed your recent report and would appreciate your insight on how these changes might impact long-term operations. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the risks going forward. I didn't hesitate. I wrote up a detailed assessment explaining the risks of Greg's changes. I didn't have to sugarcoat anything. The gaps were obvious. The company was teetering and Greg's strategy wasn't going to hold. I wasn't interested in making Greg look bad. I just wanted to make sure the right people had the information they needed. The more I interacted with Karen, the more I understood that Helix was already sizing me up. I was becoming the expert they needed to keep the company from falling apart. The guy in the background, fixing everything quietly, while Greg took the spotlight. Then Greg made his next big move, a complete overhaul of the leadership team. He brought in a consultant to assess the talent pool, but I could already see the problem. His proposed changes violated the very continuity framework I had built to protect the company. Once again, I documented everything, every risk, every oversight, and every clause that was about to be ignored. And once again, I sent it to Helix. I didn't expect Greg to notice, but of course, he did. That afternoon, he stormed into my office. "You're undermining me," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "You've been sending all this stuff to Helix behind my back." I stayed calm. "No, Greg, I'm making sure the company survives." His eyes flashed with anger, but I didn't budge. I had no intention of getting into a shouting match. The next day, I got the call. Helix had frozen all staffing changes. Every one of Greg's proposed changes was on hold. It wasn't just a minor shift. This was a game changer. Greg had no idea what had just happened. I knew this was the meeting where it would all come together. Pacific Freight Solutions and Helix had been circling each other for months, and today, the transition would finally happen. I walked into the conference room, the familiar smell of coffee and paper hanging in the air. The room was set up in that sterile corporate way, with the long table and leather chairs. Greg was already standing at the front, clicking through his flashy PowerPoint slides. His voice was high energy, too eager, as he pitched his vision for the company's future. He talked about growth, about innovation, about the bright new direction he was leading us toward. The slides were all graphs and colorful charts, each one more optimistic than the last. It looked good, but it was smoke and mirrors. I sat quietly at the back, arms crossed, waiting for him to finish. Greg's confidence was all bravado. He wasn't talking about the real problems, the ones I had been fixing in the shadows. He wasn't talking about the cracks in the foundation. And he wasn't mentioning that, behind the scenes, Helix had already started to take control. Greg finished his presentation, and the room was dead silent for a beat. I could feel the eyes of the room on him, waiting for someone to speak. Karen from Helix began reviewing the continuity plans, outlining the operational systems that would keep things running smoothly post-acquisition. She was going through the details, explaining how things needed to align. Before she could finish, though, the CEO of Helix, David Green, looked over at me. His gaze was steady, calculating. "Jack," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness, "can you clarify whether the staffing changes Greg proposed have been approved under the continuity framework?" I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to. I slid my business card across the table to David. It was a simple move. No fanfare, no words. Just the card, my name, my role as continuity lead, and Helix's logo. The room went silent, thick, heavy silence. Greg started to laugh, nervous, like he was trying to brush it off, like he didn't feel the shift in the air. "It's just a formality, right?" he said, his voice a little too high-pitched. "We're just finalizing the plan." David didn't laugh. He picked up the card, glanced at it, and looked down at the document in front of him. His eyes skimmed the lines, then locked onto the legal language. Slowly, he looked back at the room. "I see," David said, his voice calm but firm. "According to the continuity framework, all staffing decisions now fall under Jack's authority. That includes the leadership changes Greg has proposed." The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening with the weight of his words. I felt the shift, but I kept my face neutral. Greg, on the other hand, looked like the floor had dropped out from under him. His bravado crumbled in an instant. He stared at David, then back at me, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the right words. Greg tried to recover. This can't be," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I'm the one leading this company." David's eyes didn't waver. "The framework has been set, Greg. It's Jack's call now." The power shifted so quickly it was almost painful to watch. Greg's moment of triumph, his carefully built image of control, evaporated before him. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The document in David's hand spoke for itself. Greg's reaction was almost laughable. The moment David made his announcement, the shock hit Greg like a punch to the gut. He stood there for a second, his face going from pale to red in a heartbeat. Then his mouth opened, but no words came out at first. Finally, he found his voice. "This isn't right," he said, trying to mask the panic creeping into his tone. "I'm the one who's been leading the company. I should be the one in charge after the acquisition." David didn't blink. "The decision's been made, Greg. You'll be reassigned." Greg's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked around the room, but no one was backing him up. The board, the Helix team. They all sat quietly, eyes down or focused on their notes. Their loyalties already shifted. His leadership was over. David cleared his throat, the words falling from his mouth like stones. "We've decided you'll oversee regional distribution. You'll be based in Kansas City. It's a vital role, but one that's far from the spotlight." I could feel the air in the room change. Greg was losing control, and he knew it. His face went from red to a sickly shade of gray, and for a moment, he looked like he might explode, but instead, he just nodded, a tight smile pulling at his lips, the kind that wasn't really a smile at all. He turned and left the room without another word, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't done yet. Later that day, Greg cornered me in the hallway. His eyes were wild, like a man who just realized the ground had shifted beneath him, and now he was scrambling to hold on. "You planned this all along," he spat, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You've been playing me from the start." I didn't flinch. I wasn't surprised, but I didn't play the same game he did. I wasn't about to fire back with insults or accusations. "No, Greg," I said, my voice steady. I prepared for it. The finality in my tone seemed to cut through him. He opened his mouth to say something else, but stopped, probably realizing there was nothing left to say. He turned and walked away, shoulders slumped. It wasn't long before the reassignment was made official. Greg was sent to Kansas City to manage a warehouse operation. He'd gone from CEO to managing a warehouse, and he couldn't even deny it. The power was gone, and all that was left was the shell of the man who thought he had it all figured out. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. It wasn't about winning a petty battle. It was about making sure the company didn't fall apart. I went back to my desk, ready to do the job I'd always done. I could feel the shift. I wasn't just the continuity lead anymore. I was the one holding everything together, quietly steering the ship. In the days that followed, I worked with the team to rebuild the company's internal operations. Trust needed to be restored. Relationships needed mending, but I didn't need to make a big speech about it. The work spoke for itself. The system started running smoothly again, the delays stopped, and the employees began to relax. They weren't worried anymore. They were confident that, no matter what, things would get done. Things started to settle down after Greg's departure. It wasn't instant, but it didn't take long before the company felt different, quieter, more focused. The chaos that had been creeping in for months finally started to fade. The operational systems I'd put in place years ago, the ones Greg had ignored, were humming again, smooth and steady. We were back to the kind of efficiency that had made Pacific Freight a name people trusted. I didn't pay much attention to the whispers. People were talking, sure, but I wasn't interested in indulging their curiosity. The more they speculated about my role, the more I kept my head down and my focus clear. This wasn't about me. It was about the company getting back on track. I reached out to key vendors, the ones who had been unsettled by the acquisition. I reassured them, reestablished those relationships with quiet confidence. They didn't need more than that. They needed to know that things were running smoothly again and that they could count on us to keep delivering. A few weeks later, I got an email from Karen at Helix. Her words were brief, but they hit the mark. "Jack, your efforts haven't gone unnoticed. We're entering the next phase of integration, and your work has been instrumental. Thank you." I leaned back in my chair after reading it, a small satisfaction settling in. I wasn't looking for recognition, but it felt good to know that the right people saw what I'd done. They appreciated the work, and that was enough. Not long after, David Green called me into his office. I could feel the shift in the air when I walked in, the weight of the moment pressing on me. We talked for a few minutes, then he got to the point. "Jack, the progress we've seen over the last few months has been impressive. I want to offer you a permanent leadership role within the new company structure, a title that reflects what you've contributed and the direction we're heading." It wasn't a surprise, but hearing it confirmed still hit me differently. I nodded, keeping my expression steady. No grand speech, no drama. I was ready. This was the role I had prepared for, not through manipulation, but through the work itself. David handed me the offer letter, and I accepted it without hesitation. It wasn't about the title, it was about what came next. I had a company to rebuild. We had a future to focus on. I walked out of his office and straight back to my desk, the weight of the job settling over me. But this time, it felt right. The next steps were clear. I would steady the ship, build on the progress we'd made, and make sure nothing slipped through the cracks again.